There is a stretch of earth in northern France that has never fully recovered. I do not mean that poetically, I mean it literally. The soil in certain parts of the Somme is still so saturated with iron, with unexploded shells, with a chemical residue of mustard gas, that farmers cannot grow certain crops there even today. Over a century later, the land remembers what happened to it in a way that living things usually do not. I want to start there with the ground itself, because what I am about to tell you is not entirely a story about soldiers. It is a story about a place, and about what happens to a place when enough human beings die in it badly enough, and fast enough, that something very old decides to take notice. But before we get to the Western Front, I need to take you somewhere older. The Norse called it the Oskadia, the Germans called it the Wild Jad. In English, we translate both as the Wild Hunt, but that translation loses something important, because the word hunt implies pursuit of prey, and what the old sources actually describe is something closer to a procession, a march, something moving through the world with complete indifference to the living. The earliest written records come from 11th century Germany. A monk named Berchard of Worms documented it in a church text called the Corrector, essentially a list of sins and folk superstitions he was trying to stamp out among the German peasantry. He described a procession of the dead, led by a figure of immense size, moving through forests and fields at night, always in the aftermath of battle. The peasants, he noted with visible frustration, left food out for it, not as an offering, or like an apology, as if to say, "We see you passing through, we are not in your way, please keep moving." Here is the detail that gets me every single time. It is not the size of the leading figure. It is not the dead following behind it. It is this. Witnesses across dozens of accounts from different countries, different centuries, different languages consistently describe the procession moving in complete silence. No footsteps, no breathing, just movement through the dark, and one specific feeling that comes up again and again in the old records. The thing at the front of the procession knew you were watching, and had decided you were not worth stopping for. That is not a comforting thought to sit with. The connection between the wild hunt and battlefields is not something modern researchers invented. It is original to the mythology itself. Odin's host, one of the older Norse names for the procession, was specifically said to move through places where men had died violently and in large numbers, gathering something from the dead that the living did not have a proper word for. Not soul, say exactly. The old sources are careful about that distinction. Something else. Something released when enough men die at once in the same piece of ground. Some German sources call it Todeshok, breath of death. The idea that mass violent death exhales something from a place, and that exhalation pulls ancient things toward it. I know how that sounds. Part of me wants to wave it off as old peasant superstition. But here is what I cannot get past. This belief that enormous battlefield death draws something old and nameless does not belong only to Norse or German tradition. It appears in Mesopotamian clay tablets, in ancient Chinese battlefield folklore, in the oral histories of Plains Indian nations regarding sites of great massacres. Almost every culture that has experienced large-scale organized war has arrived, independently, at the same conclusion. When enough men die in one place, something comes to that place. Something that was already ancient when the war started. The Western Front of World War I was, by any honest measure, one of the largest open-air killing grounds in human history. I want to give you one number, just one, so the scale of what I am describing lands properly. At the Battle of the Somme alone, between July and November of 1916, approximately 1.2 million men were killed or wounded in roughly 4 months, on a strip of land that at its deepest was never more than about 7 miles wide. The ground between the two trench systems, what both sides simply called no man's land, was not just dangerous. Soldiers who crossed it, or who survived in its proximity for months, described something harder to put into words. Trees reduced to black splinters, craters full of cold brown water and things that used to be men, and the smell. Veterans who tried to describe it in letters home always hit the same wall. They would start a sentence and stop. The word they kept landing on across account after account, written by men who never met, with the same one every time. Wrong. It did not smell like death exactly. It smelled like something underneath death. Something that had gotten into the soil and decided to stay. And into that landscape, that poisoned, grief-saturated, obliterated strip of earth between two armies who had spent years trying to destroy each other, something was seen walking by both sides. Described in 2 different languages with words that translated almost exactly the same way. A French liaison officer attached to British lines in the Somme sector wrote in his private journal in 1917 that the soldiers he was embedded with had given the figure a name. They called it the Walker, not because of how it moved, though they had watched it move, but because of what happened when it stopped. When it turned toward the trenches, the men said it felt less like being watched and more like being counted. That word, counted, it appears in more than one account, written by men who never spoke to each other. I have been sitting with that word for a long time now, and I still do not have a clean answer for it. What I do have are the accounts, and one letter, written in the mud near Passendel, that stops in the middle of a sentence, paper not torn. pen simply set down for a reason that nobody has ever been able to explain.
This is the Frontline, and these are their stories. I'm Marcus Reed, and this is Frontline Stories. Before I bring you the accounts, and there are 3 of them tonight, and I want to warn you that the 3rd one is the one that stayed with me longest. I want to place you somewhere, not in a history book, not in a museum. I want you to feel what it was actually like to be in a trench on the Western Front in 1916. Because without that, what these soldiers saw will not hit you the way it needs to. The trenches were not romantic. I know you know that. But knowing it and understanding it are 2 different things. These were men standing in mud that came up to their knees, sometimes their waists. Men who had not slept properly in weeks. Men who had watched their friends die in ways that no training had prepared them for, not because the training was bad, but because there is no training in the world that prepares a 20-year-old for what artillery does to a human body at close range. These men were operating on the absolute edge of what a human mind can endure. I'm into that condition, that broken, exhausted, terrified condition. Something appeared in the dark, between the wire. I want you to hold that thought. Now let me take you there. Somewhere on the Somme, October 1916, a British forward trench. 2 a.m. You eaten anything today? That's not eating. That's punishment. Pearson, I swear to God, if you mention food one more time, I am going to climb out of this trench and walk home. Walk home, right? Via Berlin? Yeah, via anywhere that isn't here. My mom does this thing on Sundays. Roast lamb. Gravy so thick the spoon stands up in it. Stop. Potatoes. Proper ones. Not whatever those gray things were last Tuesday. Pearson, I'm begging you. What? I'm just saying. When I get back, first Sunday home, I'm not moving from that table. They'll have to bury me there. Don't say that. What? Bury. Don't say that word. ... Right. Sorry, mate. Silence. Wind across the top of the trench. Somewhere far off, a low rumble that might be thunder or might not be. You hear that, artillery? Miles off. No, not that. The other thing. What other thing before the artillery? Just before it. That low, I don't know what to call it. Like a hum. But underneath everything. You're tired. I'm always tired. This is different. Fletcher heard it too. It's last week. He said it started around this time. 2 in the morning, give or take. Fletcher said a lot of things last week. He wasn't wrong about the gas, was he? Pause. No, he wasn't. So maybe Pearson? What? Look. Silence. Long silence. ... Where? Out there. Past the second wire. Just look. Don't use the glass. Just look with your eyes. Longer silence. I don't wait. You see it? That's a man. That's just a man out there. What man? Whose man? Which side sends a man out there at 2 in the morning, walking like that? Walking like, what do you mean like that? How else would he Pearson? How tall is that? The longest silence yet. Get the lieutenant. I'm not leaving this spot. Then I'll go. Don't move. Don't just does it look like it's moving to you? Or does it look like it's just getting closer without stop talking? Reed. Does it look like it's getting closer without moving? I said stop talking. Wind, the distant rumble again. And then, under everything, barely there, a sound that neither of them would ever describe the same way twice. Pearson would later write that it was like a held note on an organ, felt in the chest more than heard. Reed would write nothing about the sound at all. He would simply stop his account at this moment and leave the rest of the page blank. The figure in no man's land stopped walking. It turned toward the trench. I have read that dialogue scene reconstructed from 2 separate personal accounts, written by men in the same unit, more times than I can count. And every time I get to that last line, something happens in my chest that I cannot fully explain. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. The specific feeling of realizing that something already knows where you are. The following accounts were sent to Frontline Stories by real service members and researchers who have spent years studying what soldiers reported along the Western Front. What you are about to hear has never appeared in any official report, not because it was classified, but because the men who experienced it came home, sat down across from the people they loved, opened their mouths, and found they did not have the words. So they said nothing and carried it alone for the rest of their lives. I want to be honest with you about something before we get into the first account. I almost structured this episode differently. I almost led with the rational explanations: shell shock, sleep deprivation, the documented psychological effects of prolonged trench warfare. I almost put the skepticism first. I decided not to, because I think you deserve to hear what these men actually describe before anyone tells you what to think about it. So here is what they described. The first account came from Private First Class Thomas, British Expeditionary Force, 16th Middlesex Regiment. He writes, "I want to say up front that I was not a superstitious man before the war. My father was a schoolteacher. My mother read Dickens to us on Sunday evenings. I believed in what I could see and touch and measure. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that what I am about to describe is not the account of a frightened child or a man with a weak mind. I was 22 years old, I had been in the line for 11 months, and I had seen enough real horror by that point that I no longer startled easily. Whatever I had left to be afraid of, I thought I had already met it. I had not. This was October of 1916. We were holding a section of forward trench roughly 2 miles northeast of the village of Guillemont, or what had been Guillemont before the guns got to it. There was almost nothing left of it by then, just foundation stones and a smell of old plaster that somehow survived everything else. Our section of trench had been carved out of ground that had already changed hands 4 times. The soil was not natural anymore. I cannot explain that better than that. It looked like soil.
Old.
It behaved like soil. But there was something about being in it, surrounded by it, that felt like standing inside something that had already given up. The night it happened, I was on 2 to 4 watch, meaning I stood at the fire step, a raised ledge inside the trench wall that let you see over the parapet from 2 in the morning until 4. Standard rotation? I had done it hundreds of times. The night was cold in a very specific way. Not wind cold, still cold. The kind of cold that feels deliberate, like the temperature itself has decided to press down on everything. My breath disappeared before it left my mouth. My back teeth ached. The mud on the trench walls had gone stiff and was making small sounds as it contracted, tiny cracking sounds. All around me, like the ground was settling into itself. No man's land in front of our position was maybe 80 yards across at that point, closer than most. The German wire started where ours ended, more or less with a strip of destroyed earth between craters. Rusted wire, timber from collapsed dugouts, and things I will not name that the mud had not fully swallowed yet. On a clear night with good moonlight, you could see most of it. That night had both. Clear sky, nearly full moon, the kind of pale silver light that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. I was scanning the wire the way you scanned after 11 months, not with full attention, not hold full attention for 2 hours. You develop a kind of soft focus, eyes moving without urgency, mind half somewhere else. And then something pulls you back. Not a sound, not a movement, or like a change in the quality of the air. A shift in pressure, almost. Like the moment before a photograph is taken, if that makes any sense. I focused. There was a figure in no man's land. My first thought, and I mean the very first thing my brain produced, was that it was one of ours. A scout. A patrol that nobody had told me about, because that is what a trained soldier does. He finds the explanation that fits inside his existing world before he allows himself to consider anything outside it. I almost called it in as a friendly. I had my hand on the field telephone. Then I looked at the height. The figure was standing in a shell crater that I had used as a reference point for weeks. I knew that crater. The near lip of it came up to about chest height on a standing man. I had seen men climb in and out of it during daylight raids. Figure standing in that crater, standing in it, not beside it, had its shoulders above the lip. I did the calculation without wanting to. Whatever was standing in that crater was somewhere between 9 and 11 feet tall, maybe more. The moonlight made it hard to be certain, but not that hard. I am a school teacher's son. I know how to measure things. It was not moving. It was standing the way a person stands when they have been somewhere for a long time and have no particular reason to leave. Weight settled, unhurried, and it was facing our trench. Not scanning, not searching. facing us with the specific stillness of something that has already found what it was looking for. I want to tell you about the sound, because there was one, and I have never been able to describe it satisfactorily, but I have to try. It was low. Below the range of what you would normally call hearing, more felt than heard, in the sternum and the back of the jaw. Like the lowest note of a church organ played in a building too small for it. It did not start. It was simply there. The way you suddenly notice a smell that must have been present for some time. And the moment I became aware of it, it stopped.
Ow.
And then the figure turned its head. Not its body, just its head. Slowly, in the way you turn to look at something you have been aware of for a while, but have only now decided to acknowledge. It looked directly at me, not at the trench. Not at our position, it's at me. Specifically. In a way that made every inch of military training I had drained out of my body completely. I did not call it in. I did not raise my rifle. I stood there on that fire step with my hands at my sides, and I thought, with a clarity I had never experienced before and have never experienced since, it already knows my name. I do not know how long I stood there. When my relief arrived at 4 o'clock, I was still standing in the same position. He had to touch my arm twice before I moved. The second account came from Jeff Reiter Wilhelm Becker. German Imperial Army, 99th Infantry Regiment, 26th Division, he writes. I am going to stop here for a second before I read this to you, because what this next soldier describes, I genuinely was not prepared for it, and I have read a lot of accounts. I want you to remember that, Thomas, the British soldier from the first account, and Wilhelm Becker never met, never corresponded, never shared a language. What they describe is not similar. It is not approximately the same. It is, and I am choosing this word carefully, identical, down to one specific detail that I cannot explain away, no matter how hard I try, he writes. I was a practical man, still am. If God permits me to finish this account and reach old age in one piece, which at the time of writing I consider unlikely, but not impossible. I mention this because I know what soldiers say about men who report strange things from the line. I know the words they use. I do not want those words attached to my name. But I am writing this down because I believe it happened to more men than just me, and because I believe that somewhere it's on the other side of the wire.
Ash.
At least one British soldier is writing down the same thing right now and hoping someone believes him. This was November of 1916. Our position was on the northern edge of the Somme sector, in a section of trench we had held since late summer. The ground in front of us, what both sides called Nimmensland, no man's land. The dead ground between was by that point so churned by shellfire that it no longer resembled anything that had once been a field in France. It looked like the surface of something that had never been meant to support life. Gray-brown and crater-pocked and wrong in a way I never found the German words for. I was on night watch. Late. Maybe 2 in the morning, maybe a little after. The cold was absolute. Not the cold of wind or rain, but of complete stillness. The kind that settles into the bones of the earth itself and radiates upward through your boots. My jaw ached. My exhaled breath vanished before it reached the parapet. Those details I remember because they were the last normal things I noticed before everything changed. The sound came first, very low. Below the range of ordinary hearing, felt more in the chest and the hinge of the jaw than actually heard. Like the pipes of a cathedral organ, but sourced from everywhere at once. From the ground itself rather than from any particular direction. I had the strange thought, and I know how this reads, that the sound was not being produced by anything. It was simply a property of the air in that place at that hour, the way certain caves hum when the wind moves through them. Then I looked into no man's land, and I saw the figure. It's very tall, impossibly tall, standing in a shell crater approximately 60 meters from our wire. A crater I knew well because its near edge was a reliable height marker. That near edge would reach a standing man at about the chest, as the figure's shoulders were well above it. I am not a man given to exaggeration. I was a carpenter before the war. I measured things for a living. What I saw in that crater was between 3 and 3.5 meters tall. Perhaps more. The moonlight was good. I was not uncertain. It was not moving. It was standing with the settled patience of something that existed entirely outside of urgency. Facing, and this is the part I have never spoken aloud before writing it here, facing me, specifically, in the way that a person faces another specific person across a room when they have something to say, and then it turned its head. Not the body, only the head. Slowly, the way you turned to look at something you already knew was there. I have no memory of the rest of that watch. My relief found me at my post at 4 a.m, standing upright, hands at my sides, rifle untouched. He asked me 3 times what I had seen before I was able to form words. The first words I produced were in the dialect of my grandmother's village, a form of German I had not spoken since childhood. I do not remember choosing them. I want to stop there and just sit with that for a moment. A British soldier and a German soldier. Opposite sides of the same ground, neither knowing the other existed. Both of them found at 4 a.m. by their relief, standing upright, hands at their sides, unable to speak. Both describing a figure turning only its head, not the body, only the head. 2 men, 2 languages. One detail so specific that coincidence stops being a comfortable explanation. The third account is the one that removes any remaining possibility of writing this off as a historical curiosity, because this one is recent. This account came from Corporal James Whitfield, British Army, Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. He writes, "This was 2019. I was part of a small team attached to a commemorative battlefield tour operation near Thiepval. On the Somme, routine duty. We were there to provide logistical support for a memorial service, nothing more. On the second night, I was doing a perimeter check of the equipment compound we had set up near the memorial site. Standard stuff. I had done 100 of them. The ground around Thiepval is maintained, green, peaceful looking in daylight. Tourists walk it every day. At 2 a.m, with a weak torch and the memorial looming behind me, it is something else entirely. I heard the sound before I saw anything. Low, below hearing really. Felt it in my chest first, then my back teeth. I thought it was a generator somewhere. Then I realized there was no generator running. I turned on my torch and pointed it toward the open ground north of the compound. The light reached maybe 20 meters. At the edge of that reach, just barely inside it, there were 2 points of reflection. Too high off the ground to be an animal, too still to be a person. Too far apart to be. I stopped thinking in categories at that point. The torch battery died. Brand new battery. Just gone. In the dark that followed, I heard one thing before I ran. It's that same low sound, slightly louder than before. And then directly in front of me, from something I could no longer see, an exhale. Long and slow and patient. Like something settling in for the night. I filed no report. There was nothing in the report categories that covered what I had just experienced. Instead, I went back to my sleeping bag, lay down fully clothed with my boots on, and did not move until sunrise. I looked up the location the next morning on a battlefield map. The ground north of the Thiepval compound, the exact direction I had pointed my torch, was part of the original no man's land, 1916, right in the middle of the Somme sector. Same ground. 103 years later?
Okay, let me think through this with you honestly, because I owe you that. I did not start this channel to just read scary stories at you and walk away. That is not what this is. So let me do what I always do at this point in an episode. Let me try to take it apart. Let me try to find the seam where the rational explanation holds. And let me be honest with you about where I find it and where I do not. The first explanation, and it is the strongest one, I want to give it full credit, is shell shock. We call it PTSD now. In 1916, they called it shell shock neurasthenia, or in the less charitable language of the time, cowardice. What we know now, a century of research later, is that prolonged exposure to artillery bombardment, to the death of people close to you, to chronic sleep deprivation and malnutrition and all of that, produces measurable changes in how the brain processes sensory information, hallucinations, distorted perception of size and distance, the feeling of being watched, the inability to speak. All of it is documented. All of it is consistent with what Thomas and Wilhelm both described. Here is where that explanation starts to strain. Thomas was a veteran of 11 months in the line. 11 months. He had seen gas attacks, direct artillery hits on his trench, and the deaths of men he knew well. By his own account, he had stopped startling eyes. The brain that produced his account was not a brain encountering horror for the first time. It was a brain that had already been recalibrated by horror and had reached a kind of functional equilibrium. The hallucinations associated with extreme shell shock tend to occur in men who are acutely decompensating, breaking down in real time. Thomas was not breaking down, he was standing watch, doing his job, right up until the moment he was not. And then there is Corporal Whitfield, 2019, a commemorative tour. No artillery. No sleep deprivation beyond the ordinary. No death in his immediate vicinity, a man doing a routine perimeter check with a new torch battery. The shell shock explanation does not stretch that far. It simply does not reach. The second explanation is mass suggestion. The idea that stories circulate through military units, through letters, through shared messes, through the particular oral culture of men living in close quarters under stress, and that those shared stories begin to shape what individuals report experiencing. This is real, it is documented. It is one of the reasons eyewitness testimony is treated with such caution in legal settings. Suggestion is a genuine and powerful force on human perception. Here is my problem with that explanation in this specific case. Thomas wrote his account in a private letter that was never sent. It was found in a box of his personal effects by his granddaughter in 1987, 70 years after the war. Wilhelm Becker wrote his account in a private journal that remained in his family's possession in Bavaria, until a researcher photographed it in 2003. These two documents were never in contact with each other. The men were never in contact with each other. There was no shared oral culture between a British private and a German Jeffreiter standing on opposite sides of the same wire. The suggestion pathway does not exist. And yet the accounts match on a detail: the head turning. Only the head, not the body. That is too specific, too strange, too precise to be coincidental. Professor Luc Vercheeten, a Belgian historian who has spent 30 years archiving first-hand accounts from the Western Front, made a comment in a 2018 interview that, "I have thought about more than almost anything else I have read while preparing this episode," he said, and I am going to paraphrase because the original was in French, that the consistency of certain categories of unexplained sighting accounts from the Western Front was, in his professional assessment, one of the most statistically uncomfortable things he had encountered in 3 decades of archival research. He did not say he believed in supernatural entities. He is a historian, not a What he said was that the consistency, across accounts that demonstrably had no access to each other, was the kind of thing that made him genuinely uncertain. And genuine uncertainty, from a man who has read 30 years of primary sources, is not nothing. Here's the thing I keep coming back to though, and this is where I disagree with myself. I want to be straight with you about that. All of these explanations, shell shock, suggestion, coincidence, they all assume the accounts are wrong. They all start from the position that what these men reported did not happen, and then work backward to explain the error. But that is reasonable scientific practice. I understand why it is done that way. But there is another starting position available, and I think it deserves at least a moment of honest consideration. What if they were right? What if there is something about a place where 1.2 million people die in 4 months that changes the place in ways we do not have instruments to measure yet? What if the oldest mythologies were not inventing creatures to explain their fear, but recording observations in the only language available to them at the time? What if the thing Thomas and Wilhelm and Whitfield saw was not a hallucination or a suggestion or a coincidence, but something that has been in that ground for a very long time, and that the war did not create, but simply woke up? I am not telling you to believe that. I am genuinely not sure I believe it myself. But I will tell you this. That German corporal's letter, the one that stops mid-sentence near Passchendaele, found in the mud, paper not torn, written in a neat, clear hand right up until the last word and then nothing. That letter was written by a man who was, by all available evidence, perfectly calm, perfectly coherent, writing a complete thought. Something interrupted him mid-sentence. He never picked up the pen again. And whatever he was about to write, whatever the next word was going to be, we will never know, because he stopped. And the paper remembers the stopping, but not the reason. That is the part I cannot find a rational home for. I have tried, I keep trying, and that sentence just sits there, unfinished, in the dark. Okay, I am going to put the script down for a minute. Just let me talk to you. No narration, no structure, just me, a little tired, a little moved. Sitting here after spending the better part of 2 weeks with this particular episode in my head, I want to tell you something that has nothing to do with the Western Front, or maybe it has everything to do with it. I am still working that out. My grandfather was not a World War I soldier. He was too young for that war and too old for the next one. He spent his whole life in a small town in rural Kentucky, worked the same hardware store for 41 years, and was, by every external measure, the most unexcitable man I have ever known. Nothing rattled him, nothing surprised him. He had this quality, I noticed it as a kid and did not have the word for it until much later, of being completely present in whatever moment he was in, not distracted, not performing calm, action calm, the kind of calm that comes from having already made peace with most of the things that frighten other people. He died when I was 19, and a few weeks before he died, he was in the hospital. He knew what was coming. He had already made that peace I mentioned. He said something to me that I wrote down that same night on a piece of paper I still have somewhere in a box. He said, "Some places remember things that happened in them, not like a record, more like a bruise. You press on it, and the pain is still there even though the thing that caused it is long gone." He was not talking about the Western Front, he was talking about a specific corner of his town where something bad had happened to someone he knew, decades earlier. He was talking about how he could not walk past that corner without feeling it. even 50 years later. Even when the building was gone and a parking lot stood in its place, the ground remembered. I think about that a lot when I work on episodes like this one. I think about what it means for a piece of earth to hold something, whether that is metaphor or whether it is something more literal than we are comfortable admitting. I do not have an answer. My grandfather did not offer one either. He just said it and then asked me to hand him his water glass, and we talked about baseball for the next 20 minutes. That was the last real conversation we had. I think he knew that. I think he saved that particular thought for that particular moment on purpose, because he wanted me to carry it, and I have, for a long time now, into every episode, into every account, into every moment where a soldier stops mid-sentence and stares at something the rest of us cannot see. Some places remember I believe that. I cannot prove it, but I believe it. I also want to say something directly to anyone listening tonight who has been in a place like the ones we describe on this channel. Anyone who came home from somewhere and left something behind or brought something back that was not supposed to come with you. I want you to know that what you experienced was real. That the fact that no official report category existed for it does not mean it did not happen. That the men in tonight's episode, Tom and Wilhelm Whitfield, were not weak or confused or broken. They were paying attention. And sometimes paying attention is exactly how you find the things that were there all along. This episode was a long time in the making. The research alone took weeks. I want to thank the team that makes this channel possible, the editors who sit with this material at 2 in the morning and still do it with care, the researchers who dig through archives and languages they are still learning, and every single one of you who sends in accounts, who shares episodes, who leaves comments at midnight saying, "I thought I was the only one." You are not the only one. You were never the only one. Tonight's episode is brought to you in part by Hallowed, the prayer and meditation app that I have genuinely been using for the past several months. Not because anyone asked me to first, but because this work has a weight to it, and I needed something to put that weight down at the end of the day. If you make content about the dark, you need somewhere quiet to go afterward. Hallow has been that place for me. There is a 23-day prayer challenge on there right now that I have been working through, and it has been good for me in ways I did not expect. Try it free for 3 months at hallow.com/frontline. If it does nothing for you, nothing lost. But if you are someone who carries things, and I suspect most of you are, it might be worth a few minutes of your evening. I want to end with one last thought about that unfinished letter. The German corporal, near Pastendel, paper not torn, pen set down in the middle of a sentence that began, or had stopped walking and looked directly at our trench, and I understood then that it was not. I have spent 2 weeks trying to finish that sentence in my head, trying to give the man his last word. I cannot do it, not because I lack imagination, but because I genuinely think that whatever word he was reaching for does not exist. Not in German, not in English, not in any language that was built by people who had not yet seen what he saw that night in the mud. Some things do not have words yet. Maybe they never will. May God be with each and every one of you, no matter what you are dealing with. This is the front line, and I will see you in the next episode.